Well, howdy friends, Brian Fleshig of Mad River Outfitters in the Midwest Fly Fishing Schools, and welcome to our first live stream fly tying. You know, live streams not something we do a lot, but I guess in this day and age, it's something that you'll see quite a bit more from us in the future. So stay tuned for that. And tonight is our first ever in conjunction with our good friends at Whiting Farms. And it's going to feature Justin Christofferson, one of our team members here, and also one of the best fly tyers that I know. So take it away, Justin.
Hi folks, Justin Christofferson here with Mad River Outfitters and Whiting Farms. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. If you're watching us on YouTube, go ahead and follow us. If you're watching us on Facebook, go ahead and give us a like. Thanks so much for joining us again, guys.
You might not have audio. Can you guys hear? Let us know in chat.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Okay, we got audio.
Okay, we're good. All right, guys. I'm going to tie two flies for you. We'll just dive right in. And the first one is going to be this little bait fish popper. It's a really simple but effective popper that I really like, and it's easy to tie. Okay, audio's good, confirmed. First fly again. Little popper, little blockhead popper, super simple pattern. Tons of little variations we can do with it. I'll talk about those a little bit as I tie it. But really, really simple, effective pattern that I think is a great one to have with you. The second one I'm going to tie, changing gears a little bit, is going to be a little mayfly nymph. Really neat little pattern. Uses some cool materials and just a really good looking little mayfly nymph. Okay, let's just get started. So, first pattern, blockhead popper. Let's start with the hook. I really like the Gamakatsu B10S size 2 for this hook, for this fly. So I'll go ahead and put this in the vise here. And we're going to be using medium blockhead poppers from Rainey's here. Matches up really perfectly with this hook. The popper head's going to take up most of this hook shank, so we're going to be using just this back part to basically tie the entire fly with. Thread I'm going to be using today, UTC 140. I'm going to do this in white. We're going to go ahead and just get the thread started at the front here. And one thing you want to make sure you're doing with poppers is leaving enough space for this popper head. So what I like to do is do open spirals back until I get to the back section. I'm going to kind of do side-by-side wraps and move forward just above that hook point. And I'll double check and make sure that that's going to be the right spacing for the popper head. That looks about perfect. So now I can tell where this thread base is. That's where I'm tying my entire fly essentially. So it's just kind of a visual cue for me. Go ahead and I'll move the thread back to the bend of the hook there. And first material is going to be marabou. So I'm not going to be too picky about my marabou for this fly, but I am going to go ahead and grab two decent looking plumes. Just rip those free. Doesn't need to be pretty. You do want a decent amount of marabou in the back here. We're not trying to go super crazy, but we don't want too thin of a tail either. Okay, we'll just cut that one off. Actually, nope, don't like that one. There we go. All right, and we're going to prep this the way I pretty much always prep marabou. If you pull these tips up, you'll notice that some are going to fall a little short, like these ones here. So I'm just going to rip all those off so that I have even tips. Okay, take a little more off of that one. And, oh, that was a bad piece. That'll do. Again, I'm not being too picky with the marabou. Okay, a lot of trash here. Get this out of the way. And first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to line up the tips here before I tie it in. I'm just going to tie them in at the same things, a little quicker and simple. You can wet the marabou. It makes it a little easier to work with. Now, if you wanted to, you could tie in one piece at a time, maybe layer in some flash in between the two pieces. That's a pretty cool effect, but I just don't really think that's necessary here. So I'm going to measure this to be about a hook shank in length, maybe a touch longer, but about a hook shank in length is good. Got a few real good tight securing wraps, and I'm going to move that thread forward. And remember, I'm only tying on that thread base in the back section. Okay, so that's about good there. Lift these up, give them a twist, and snip. Now that can leave a lot of butts, so I like to come in with some finer tip scissors and just clean that up a little bit so I keep my tying platform nice and clean. And so I can see my thread again where I need to stop. Okay, I can even double check it once more, make sure we're good. Okay, that looks good. Next item is some flash. I'm gonna go ahead and use some crystal flash. Gonna grab 3 strands. Doesn't really matter how many you grab, but 3 strands seems about right. And we'll just do kind of basically a V-tie here. Not looking to be too precise with this. Just gonna tie some in on the near side and the far side. Kind of give it a little spread, maybe 180 degrees or so. It's okay if it's down each side. Doesn't really matter that I'm not too picky with that. We'll go ahead and trim that off just a touch longer than the marabou. And we're going to go ahead and add some feathers next. Now this is going to be a baitfish popper. So for this one, I'm going to use some rooster saddles right down the side, concave in. So I'm not going to splay these tails out like you'll see on a lot of poppers. This one is going to be more of a baitfish popper. So with that in mind, I'm just going to use some bugger packs here from Whiting. Just a regular grizzly. Got 2 feathers picked out here already. And I'm just going to tie them in on the side. And I'm not going to be too concerned about these twisting on me or not. They do twist on you a little bit. That's totally fine. These are really just accents. They're going to kind of break up that tail in the water a little bit. Give it a more realistic look. And you can definitely save these tails. These feathers. I'm only using the tips of them. So you can still use this for like a woolly bugger or something. Okay, get the second feather tied in. Loose wraps here. I don't want to twist the feather, but again, once this marabou's wet, it's going to kind of bleed together, and you're going to really just have a few kind of markings to break up that all-white tail. So don't worry about it too much here. This one's giving me a little trouble, but that's fine. Let's try that again. Well, I'm a little bit off of my tying platform, but you know what? It's going to be okay. And that feather twisted on me and my other one fell out. All right. Tying doesn't always go the way you want it to. It's okay, though. All right, that is fine like that. Okay, so at that point, I am going to add some super glue. I want to lock all that into place here. Normally I use a brush on. I don't see that right now, so I'll just use this gel I got here. I do typically like to use Z-Ment there. It's a really thin super glue. It'll kind of soak into that material a lot better and lock everything into place. All right, let me just check the head one more time since I kind of went down on my shank a little bit there. We're still good. Okay, next thing is a collar. I'm going to use this black laced hen saddle from Whiting. It's going to give it a real nice kind of speckled look to it. And the feathers I'm going to grab from here, I'd say, are about a size, medium size feather or something. We don't want that collar to be too big, but we do want it to come back, I'd say, at least to the back of that hook, back of the bend of the hook. So I'm going to go ahead and prep these how I would almost every time I'm using hen feathers. Going to pull off all that fluff at the bottom. Grab it by the tips. I have 2 feathers here, by the way. Grab them by the tips and kind of stroke those fibers back. And cut this tip off to make a little triangle for aiding in tying in. Okay, so I'll go ahead and just tie this in by the tips. Okay. And now I want my thread advanced onto that bare shank. That's where I'm going to tie off these feathers, and it's going to be right at the back of that popper head. So I'll do a half hitch there, throw the thread into my bobbin cradle. Don't need hackle pliers for this. These stems are plenty long enough, so I'll just grab them both at the same time. Stroke the fibers back a little bit, and begin my wraps. Gonna keep stroking these fibers back. I want them to really lay back and kind of puff out and make a nice kind of full collar here. Okay. Ideally, you're gonna end just past that base of thread we've been tying on. Okay, go ahead and lock down these stems. Give them a trim. All right, moving along. This is, like I said, a pretty simple pattern. That's almost the whole fly. I'm gonna wrap this back, make sure that's nice and secure and tight. I'm gonna check my head one more time here. Looking good. Next thing I wanna do is I wanna add a substantial thread base to this fly. This is gonna help that popper head really lock in place with the glue that we're gonna add. So I'll just run my thread back and forth here, however many times I feel is good, 10 times or so. Just get a real good substantial base of thread there. Don't need to go too crazy. Okay, now we can cut that off. Time to prep the head. Okay, so again, we got the medium blockhead popper here. And what we're gonna need to do, there's a few ways to do this. With these blockhead poppers, I actually like to take a razor blade and just put a slit down the middle. That way I can slide it over the hook with some glue and you're basically done. The other way you can do it is you can grab a bodkin and create a hole from back to front. The way I like to do it is, line it up, take your time, get it in there evenly, make sure it's good. And then I would heat up the tip of the bodkin with a lighter and then remove it. That way I know I'm lined up before I burn it and make the hole a little bigger and more permanent. So with this one, like I said, I'm gonna just grab a razor blade, and it's pretty easy to line up. This one already has some marks in it that I put on earlier, but you can just kind of line up the razor blade, put it in ever so slightly, and then you can double check and make sure it looks even. That looks pretty good. Now I'm just gonna slide it in a little deeper. Now with this, what I like to shoot for is on the back side of the popper head, I like the razor blade to go about halfway up.
Can you put it really close to the hook?
Right there?
Yeah. And then angle that towards the camera. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. So the razor blade will come up about halfway on the back side of the popper and about a third of the way, maybe a little more on the front side. Seems to be a good sweet spot for me. I'm gonna kind of crease that open a little bit to aid in putting it on. And I've already checked the length, so I know I'm good there. So I'm just gonna go ahead and grab some glue. And put a decently thick strip all the way across here. I want a good amount of glue on here because it's just the main thing holding that popper head in place. But at the same time, if I put too much on, it's gonna ooze out and kind of make a mess. So that's usually about the right amount there. Slide that on, push it down. Make sure it's level. I like to turn the vise like that and look at it like that. And it's all the way back. The eye of the hook is clear, so that's in pretty good spot there. You can kind of pinch it, help that glue set and kind of give it a better secure a little better. So there's a good amount of glue in there. That's gonna have to dry up before we mess with that anymore. But while that's happening, I can go ahead and add some eyes. Now, if this was a working fly for myself, I wouldn't add eyes. But they do look cool, and we got some time to let that glue dry, so I will go ahead and add some eyes now. But I honestly don't think it's gonna catch a more fish if there's eyes on there. I'm not sure what size these are, but I'm pretty sure they're 5mm. 5mm, 6mm would be fine. Somewhere in that range. Okay. So I'll grab my gel super glue again, and I'll just put a little dab on this side to add the eye.
Dab will do you.
Little dabble do you. You really don't need much here, honestly. So, we'll just place this right in there gently at first, and I'll use the back of my whip finisher to put it in place. Keep a little pressure on there for a few seconds. Okay. I just realized my eye has a little glue in it, so I'm going to get that out of there real quick. Just a little stem laying around, run through there, and you're good to go. Okay. Time to put the eye on the other side. These are actually, I don't know what kind of eyes these are. Normally I would use some fish skull living eyes though. And I do like the silver ones for this particular pattern. Okay, eyes are on. Fly is almost done. I want to check and make sure this glue under here is dried. I'm squeezing it and the little is oozing out, so that still needs a little bit of time to dry. But while that's happening, another good thing to mention is, as is, this is a bait fish popper, but it's very easily transformed into like a frog. So right now we've got rooster saddles going down with the side of the tail here. If I want to make this a frog, I'm going to do two things differently. I am going to put neck hackles in instead of rooster saddles, and I'm going to make those legs splay out. And I'd probably use 2 per side, maybe even 3 on a larger size fly. And other than that, I would add some rubber legs. Now, adding rubber legs is pretty simple. I'm not going to do it on this one because it is a bait fish, remember. But if it's a frog, I would just do kind of what I mentioned before with the bodkin. I would just line up a hole through the head itself on the sides. Once it's sticking out the other side, burn it with a lighter and pull it back out. Then I would take, if you have leg pullers, great. If not, a lot of people will have, a bobbin threader. That works fine too. So I would stick that in there, stick the tips of the rubber legs in, pull them through, and you're good to go. You can also change up the popper head. I like the blockhead popper a lot, but you can also use a double-barrel popper. You can use a howitzer popper. Really, you can put any popper head on here at all. But the blockhead popper I like a lot because it does a really good job of popping at short distances. So you can give that rod tip a quick jerk, make that fly pop. You can even do a mend, make that fly pop, and it's not going to have to move a very far distance to make a good pop. So you can keep it in that target zone a lot longer. And I really, really like that about the blockhead poppers. Double barrels are great too. You can certainly use those. You could even, turn it around and make it kind of like a diving popper. So you definitely got some options there as well. Okay, so this glue is dried up. So the last thing I want to do with this fly, since we slit the foam to put it on the shank, I want to cover that slit up with some resin. Wrong one. I'm going to use Flex here from Raid Zap. And I got the brush here. I'm just going to brush it into that gap. Sometimes I end up coating the whole bottom with the resin. Sometimes I just do a strip across the gap. Whatever you feel like, I don't think it really matters. So just give that a couple seconds to kind of sink in, maybe fill in that gap if you have that gap still. Sometimes when you put it on the shank, you can get that to close really well and you don't even really have a gap. Okay. Zapping it with the light.
Put some corn dog live living on there.
Absolutely. You got to. Yeah, if you want to spice this up, check out our Mad River Outfitters video that we posted earlier today. There's some really cool scented stuff you could add to that. Wink, wink. Okay, that's it. That is done. And now, like I said, this is just a really simple base for a popper. You could totally make all sorts of adjustments to this. Different colors, different feathers, like I said. And the frog version's a great option, too. So
What's its name?
we're going to call this the Scioto Slayer. It's a really good smallmouth river fly, and that's the closest smallmouth river we got nearby, so I think that makes a lot of good sense. There it is, folks. Watch out for this guy. Okay, that is it for that one. You could bust these out. You could probably do a dozen of these an hour if you get rolling, no problem. I mean, it's a pretty quick fly, but super effective. Okay, let's see. I guess we'll move on to the nymph. Don't think there's anything else to mention on that. Of course, if you guys have questions, please put your questions in the comment section. Stick around. We'll address those at the end. All right, so just to show you now, the next fly I want to tie for you is this mayfly nymph. Really cool mayfly nymph. So we're going to use some whiting Coq de Leon for the tail here. We're going to use a turkey biot for the ribbing and the body. Ideally, I do like to use squirrel dubbing for the thorax, but I don't have any right now, so I'm going to use hare's ear. Any spiky dubbing will work well. You could use SLF. Just, anything you got laying around is probably fine. But I like something spiky for this fly more than others. It's going to have a flash back with some resin on it for a little hump. We're going to make a pretty pronounced hump on there. Some legs out the side. That's going to be some partridge feather. And that's really about it for this fly. But it is a really cool little mayfly nymph. So let's go ahead and get that started for you. The hook I like for this one is the Tiemco 3761. We're going to do it in a size 14. You could probably use any 1X long nymph hook for this and it'll be fine. I've just kind of fallen in love with this hook for this pattern. So we'll go ahead and get that in the, we'll go ahead and put a bead on it first actually. So 7/64 gold bead for this one. Put that in the vise now, and first thing I'm gonna do is add some lead wraps. I don't want it to get too bulky, so I'm gonna go with 15 thousandths lead on this one. And I'm just gonna give it about probably 10 wraps, we'll see here.
And if you want to show the product, you can just point it close to that camera lens there, to your right.
Perfect. Thank you, Dev. Okay, gave it about 10 wraps, push the wires up into the bead. That is enough, I'll break off the excess. Thread I'm going to use on this fly is Danville 6/0. You can certainly use like 70 denier would work well. Whatever you're comfortable with, but nothing too bulky. So I'll start the thread just behind those lead wraps. Cut off my tag end. And I'm going to do a few wraps over this lead to kind of help secure that and lock it in place. Okay, once that's on there, we're going to go straight to the tail. Again, this camera?
That one.
Oh, that camera. Coq de Leon, whiting. This stuff makes awesome tails. And a really cool variation, this I just thought of this, or reminded me of this. This fly can actually be done on a jig nymph, on a jig hook, kind of like a Euro fly. Put a tungsten bead on there. And instead of the legs done this way that I showed you in the first one, you could do just like a hackle, like a rooster hackle, a dry fly rooster hackle, and kind of make it like a blowtorch style fly. So, just gonna grab any feather. This does not, we really don't have to be picky here. Any feather will do for the legs here. I do want some with the stiffer fibers though. If you could find some of those with some barring on it, that's gonna look a lot better. This one is kind of mostly white, but that's fine. So I'm not going to grab too many feathers here. I think I grabbed probably 6. I'm not really counting. And I'll just place those on there. Okay, adjust the tail to the length I want. That'll be good. And keep the tail on the top of the hook shank as you wrap back. And then back up. Thanks. Okay. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tie in the turkey biot. This is going to be the body. Turkey biots, you can make this ridge on the body that looks like segmentation, and it's a really cool effect. So you got to make sure that you tie this feather in correctly in order to make it wrap correctly and get that ridge, get that segmentation. So this particular turkey feather here, the biots are on, if I'm looking at the top of the feather, the biots are on the right side. Packages come with a pair of feathers, so the other feathers from the other side of the bird these buyouts would be on the left side. If you're using this feather with the buyouts on the right side, then to get that ridge, we're going to tie it in so that now there's kind of a clear, opaque side to this, and then like a solid color. The solid color has that ridge on it. So if we're using that feather and you put the clear on the bottom and the tip facing to your right, that
Show 'em by the hook.
is that a better view?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So there's like a clear part that I'm going to put on the bottom, and the ridge is on that solid color side, and it's kind of going away from me. So if I tie it in like this, then I start wrapping this, that'll ensure that that ridge is facing up and it's in the correct position. So we'll just go ahead and tie that in that. Well, I'm going to wrap this thread back, actually. I'm going to tie it in at the base. Okay, that'll advance that forward. And I've been paying attention. I want a very small amount of taper to this fly. I don't want too much taper, but I definitely do want some taper there. And that looks just about right. I'll wrap this thread up almost all the way to the bead, and I'll do a half hitch. And I do leave it back from the bead intentionally, because when I wrap this buyout forward, having that thread back just a little bit is going to make it easier to catch that buyout and tie it down. All right, I'll grab some hackle pliers and begin wrapping this. First, throw my bobbin in the cradle. Okay, use the rotary feature right here. And now another thing you can do is you can add a little bit of glue down here to make this more durable. I like to use hardest hull when I do that, but for this video's sake, I'm gonna skip that step. Okay. I'll just kind of come across that, tie down this buyout. A couple wraps should do. I'll trim that off. I'll go ahead and tighten this all down here. And go ahead and wrap some thread back to about where you think that thorax needs to start. That looks about right. Okay, so
On the internet is goofing.
you still live?
No. We're not.
Okay.
The internet could.
We're back.
We're back.
Technical difficulties, folks. Thanks for sticking around.
Turned it off our phone.
Yeah. All right, let's see, where was I? So I made a thread base here to basically cover up that buyout and indicate where my thorax is going to be here. So the next thing I'm going to do is grab some dubbing, and we're going to dub that. Again, like I said, this time around I'm going to just use some hare's ear dubbing. You can certainly do something like a dubbing loop here if you wanted a little extra bugginess out of this. I'm just going to go ahead and straight twist this on. And like I said, I do generally prefer squirrel dubbing here. That's kind of my go-to dubbing, but the hare's ear is a really good substitution if you don't have that. So nothing too big, 2.5 inch long dubbing loop, noodle. I'm going to start it right behind the eye. I forgot a step. Back it up. First thing I wanted to do actually was tie in the wing case. So no problem. We'll leave that dubbing loop on there, just like so. Take off a little piece of, I'm going to use large Mirage tinsel here. And you can really use any sort of flashy thing that you got laying around. Flashy boo would be okay. Really doesn't matter too much, but this has a lot of reflectivity to it. I do like this stuff here. And once we put that bump of resin on the top, it tends to really catch the light better. So we'll tie on our wing case and wrap back, keeping that dubbing out of the way. And then we'll check that by pulling it forward. I still need to go back a little bit. You don't want this wing case to be too small. That'll look funny. So you want it to be a little decent size. Okay, let's try to readjust that dubbing. All right. Start behind the bee with the dubbing, wrap back, and then wrap back forward, and that should be about all you need to do. Nice, pretty, substantial bump of dubbing there. Okay, pull that forward to check. That looks good. Now, for the legs, I'm going to use partridge. I have a skin right here that I generally like to pull feathers from a darker area when I'm using them for the legs. So these feathers have some pretty dark tips to them. I don't know why, I just like it. So that's what I'm going to do. Any of these feathers will make good legs though. So to prep this for the legs, I'm going to strip off all this waste at the bottom. And I'm going to cut out the tip here. There's a few ways you could add these legs. One way you could do it, which I'm not doing now, but I'll explain it real quick, is before I put that dubbing in, I could basically have prepped this the same way, pulled these legs back and left that tip for a tie-in point, turn the feather upside down and tied in the tip like this.
Can't see that.
Can't see that.
Do it with your right hand. There you go.
So if I wanted to do it this way, the feather would be upside down right now with the stem facing backwards, and I can tie in the tip. After I do the dubbing, I would then be able to pull this feather forward like that, and the legs would be sticking out like that. I'm going to do it a little differently than that this time. I'm going to pull a few of these off. I got a few too many. What I'm going to do is prep it like this and I'm just going to place it on top like so. I'm going to do one loose wrap over that just to hold it in place. I'm going to immediately pull this Mirage tinsel forward and do one loose wrap on it there. Make sure it's straight. Now I'm going to take this stem, kind of hold everything in place. I hope my fingers aren't getting in the way for this, but I'm going to kind of hold everything in place and gently pull that stem forward. I'm going to check on it as I go. I'm going to pull a little bit and check on it and make sure that the legs are how I like them. That right there looks pretty good. I wouldn't want to go any shorter on those legs than that. Okay, make sure everything is straight. Tighten down those wraps a little bit. Okay, secure and wrap in front, and I can cut that off. Now again, like I said, if you were doing this like a Euro style nymph, you would ideally have it on a jig hook, tungsten bead, and instead of doing those legs like that with the partridge, I would have just left them out, done everything else the same, and then at this point, I would take a dry fly rooster saddle and give it about 2 wraps, make some kind of soft hackling thing going on there. And that would work great, but in this case, this is really good too. I'll take a couple wraps at the head there to really lock that in, and I can whip finish now. 3, 4, 5 turn whip finish. Doesn't matter on this one because I'm going to go ahead and add some UV resin on top there, which is going to lock everything in place. For that, I'm going to use thin resin by Rage App. Just make sure the legs are out of the way and you can get a nice dab right on that flash. So I do want a pretty pronounced hump on this one. So a pretty substantial bump there. Give it a second to kind of sink in just a touch and cover everything. This is not the thinnest thin of resins, and that looks good. I'll zap it. So you want something that'll kind of sink down a little bit, but you don't want it to be too thin. I think this Rage Zap thin is really just about perfect for that. Okay. And that's that. Real quick, simple, pretty cool little mayfly nymph. So I feel like I might have burned through those pretty quickly, but you know, that's really all I think I need to say about them. Again, you know, you can use pretty much, you know, you could substitute different things. Sometimes I'll use partridge for the legs on this as well, or the tail, I mean. But the Coq de Leon is really nice stuff there. Let's see if any questions so far? So right now, I think I've kind of covered everything I had planned on. Dev, any questions from people?
Will this Mayfly nymph video be made a standalone? Will you tie this again for Mad River Outfitters?
I can. Yeah, if there's some interest for that, I certainly could. This will be up on the Mad River Outfitters YouTube channel as well. This whole session, I think we're going to copy it and paste it basically, so it'll be identical. Yeah. Hopefully the connection hasn't been too bad. We did have some difficulties. We're actually running a hotspot off of a cell phone right now, so hopefully there hasn't been too many.
In the middle of Alaska too.
Yeah, right.
Let's see. We've got another one. If you don't mind, how would he go about tying a balanced leech pattern? Zonker, like a hurled cactus chenille, or composite dubbing loop? So many ways. What's yours?
So honestly, I don't fish many leech patterns. I think a woolly bugger does a pretty decent imitation of that. So if I wanted to fish a leech, it'd probably be a woolly bugger. But you know, off the top of my head, you know, what comes to mind would be if you're looking for a balanced leech pattern, you can actually do. So I would get like a jig hook, and you can actually tie on. Let's see how I can explain this best. Let's see if I have a hook to kind of demonstrate. So all I have is this B10S to kind of demonstrate here, but let's assume this is a jig hook and we're tying a leech pattern. So it's going to ride hook up, but what I would do to balance it is the first thing I would do is I would tie in maybe a piece of mono or a piece of wire, just kind of depends on what I have laying around, and I would add a bead extending off of that jig hook out here. That extra weight from that bead would help balance that jig a lot more. So, you know, after that, I would probably have like a marabou tail, and you could do a composite loop maybe. You could do like maybe a schlop-in wrapped up with some polar chenille, twist them together, and then just wrap that up the shank for the body with a marabou tail. That could be pretty cool. But yeah, as far as the balancing goes, it's a pretty neat little trick you could do. You could do that with lots of different flies, but adding an extension off the shank past the eye of the hook with a bead, maybe two, depends on the hook and what kind of balance you're looking for. You know, you're gonna have to play around with it a little bit, but you can definitely balance out your leech patterns like that. That's a pretty cool thing you can do.
May you substitute goose birthday for the turkey?
Goose birthday?
I don't know what that means.
You can substitute anything you want. Yeah, seriously. These are, you know, no fly pattern is set in stone. You can always adjust, try new things. That's how new fly patterns come about. You know, that's how you discover new things that work while fishing. You got to push the barriers, think outside the box. And there's all sorts of new materials coming out on the market these days. I mean, the fly tying world is flooded with cool materials. I mean, it's hard to keep up with everything. You got all sorts of synthetics coming out all the time. Even the natural materials are improving and broadening a bunch. Whiting has done a fantastic job over the years of really dialing in birds specifically for fly tires. So the synthetic selection, the natural selection, it's expanding so greatly. It's incredible. So, you know, everyone wants to think, you know, these are the flies that are out there. That's it. You know, everyone's thought of everything. That's not true. Not true at all with all these new material options. There's a lot that we could still do with flies. So I encourage everyone, please try different materials. Think outside the box. And who knows? I mean, that's how this sport is going to advance.
What are the best hook size ranges for dry flies?
That's I mean, it could be a pretty wide range. It's going to depend on the fly you're tying. I mean, if you want me to give you a range on dry flies, you're really talking about size maybe 30 all the way up to, heck, I mean, you can have some really big hoppers. I'm not sure what the biggest size hook I'd tie a hopper on is. I mean, probably, you know, size 2, 1, something like that.
Ronald Fisher asks, what is the best advice you have for a beginner?
For fly tying, my advice would be practice. Practice, 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 but focus on thread control and material manipulation. Those definitely cross over a good bit, but if you are comfortable with managing your thread and positioning and working with different materials, the rest is just following patterns, or following steps, and you could tie anything at that point. But working with the materials themselves and having a good grasp on thread control is gonna make you a much better tire. So
what's a good first pattern that you recommend?
Well, a lot of people say woolly buggers. I kind of agree with that. I think that was the first pattern I ever tied. Well, and that's a good one. Woolly buggers are actually pretty hard to tie perfectly, but they're easy to tie to a level that a fish will eat them, to the point where they're fishy. So, I mean, yeah, absolutely. Tie up some woolly buggers because you could take them out, and even a poorly tied woolly bugger can catch some fish. But, if you're thinking streamers, then yeah, go with woolly bugger. If you're thinking something more along the lines of nymphs, then I would probably say try something like quite honestly, a flashabou caddis, because it really doesn't get any easier than that. It'll give you a little good technique with working with some smaller hooks, some bead heads, and dubbing. And so dubbing is important to know. You're going to tie a lot of flies using dubbing. Simply put, the best tip I can give you in that regard is less is more. You'll hear that a lot, and you still won't do it right the first few times, but trust me, the less dubbing you put on at a time will make a much tighter dubbing rope and a much more durable and nicer looking fly.
A couple more, and then we'll call it a night. I'm a new fly fisher in Alberta. I started in very small creeks last year. I caught a few that were 6 inches. What size hook would you recommend for these types of fish? I've had 16 to 12 size hooks.
So the size hook for the fish you're targeting is not really what I'm first considering. The size hook is going to depend mostly on the fly you're fishing. So every fly is going to kind of have a good proportion and look great on a small range of sizes or styles of hooks. So what I mean by that is we do a lot of steelhead fishing around here, and those fish can get pretty big, 30, 33 inches, maybe even bigger. But a lot of times we're fishing those on egg flies that are size 14, that are on basically that same hook right there. But you would think, that fly needs to be bigger, that hook needs to be bigger for a bigger fish. No, because, what we're imitating is small, and that hook is going to match up to the fly that we're using to fish for them. Now, you can also fish for them with bigger bait fish imitations. If you're swinging flies, things like that, you're going to use a bigger hook because the fly calls for the bigger hook, not the fish. Of course, you want to make sure you're using high-quality hooks if you're targeting a strong fish like a steelhead. But I'm not matching up the size of hook that I'm fishing at the time to the fish that I'm fishing for. That's not how my thinking goes. It's just what fly is this fish going to eat? If it's a strong hook, it'll hold the fish.
And then what are the top 3 whiting products that you use on a regular basis in fly tying?
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question.
You can show them to that camera there.
Cool. One of them is definitely bugger packs. These things are great and versatile. Obviously, you could use them for tails on little baitfish poppers like that. You can use the whole length on larger streamer patterns. I even use those in pike and musky flies a lot. But honestly, there is, in my opinion, no better feather than a whiting bugger pack feather for a woolly bugger. But yeah, it's super versatile feathers. I mean, they're just rooster saddles, but they're great. They're great. This is definitely the one that I use the most, hands down. Let's see. The next one would be hen saddles. I'm a big fan of feather game changers, and whiting hen saddles are absolutely perfect for that. There's tons of other uses you could use those for as well. But certainly, you know, palmering them and in segments for bodies on flies are really, really popular use for me. Mainly game changers, but also, as you saw, even, you know, a collar on a popper. So that would be probably my second. And my third would be their dry fly feathers. They have really, really, really high quality rooster saddles and necks, obviously, too. And they're exclusively the feathers I use for all my dry flies. So I'd say those are my top three.
Will there be a Mad River Outfitters podcast?
Ooh. That's interesting you bring that up. I will say that nothing is official. Yeah, once we get some better internet. Nothing is official at the moment, but
If you guys
it's very, very possible at the moment. We have had some discussions about it.
start spamming comments for Brian
Yes.
on the YouTube, and we'll
Yes.
have him look at those.
Yeah, there you go.
Demand a podcast from Brian.
Yeah, if you guys ask for it, you know, we'll if there's enough interest, I can't see us not doing it. How about that?
Okay, so we're going to close out here with one final question. Jeff Price does not ask this, but I'm going to pretend that he does. Is avocado toast your favorite flavor of like butter fly floating? Or do you have a specific flavor of fly floating that you like?
I do. You know, that avocado toast is pretty killer stuff. I am technically a millennial, so I should feel obligated to choose that one. But no, the corn dog, man. Corn dog with mustard. Game changer right there. All day. No question about it.
One final question here, a serious one. PK Clark asks, I've watched the Mad River series for the beginners in fly fishing, but do you have any basic fly tying videos? Or will this series maybe contain some fly tying basics in terms of equipment?
So we don't really have like a fly tying series for beginners as of now. We do have quite a few fly tying tutorials on our YouTube channel. I do recommend looking at those. A lot of them touch on a lot of techniques that are useful for beginners to know. There's a lot of explanations in those videos that will go over how to use different tools, how to properly prep and attach certain materials to the hooks. And that, you know, so not an exact tutorial for beginners for fly tying, but a lot of good information. A lot of those videos, while can be advanced flies and a lot of advanced tyers can learn from them, they also cover a lot of stuff that beginners should know, and, you know, definitely kind of aim towards teaching a lot of people about that stuff too. Maybe down the road we'll do that. That's a really good idea, I think. So maybe down the road we will have a fly tying series, tutorials kind of geared towards starting off in fly tying specifically.
Sweet.
Great idea. I like that.
And then subscribe and like, comment.
All right. So, folks, I think that's about it. We'll wrap up. Thanks again for joining us. Thanks again to Whiting. And don't forget to like the Facebook channel if you're watching on Whiting right now. And subscribe to our YouTube channel. And ring the bell for notifications. And stay tuned, folks, because we got a lot more coming at you.
With better internet.
All right.
Thanks a lot for watching.
Thank you for watching, guys. Have a great night.